Zealand, he has an extensive experience in archaeology from Pacific region, India, Spain, Italy, now Bosnia. He came last year as a volunteer, imagine, from New Zealand, spending a few bucks to get here and to be here, and then volunteering for probably 4 or 5 weeks there, if I remember. He did an excellent job at that time on one of the objects that we have not visited, the Temple of Mother Earth. On top of it, he was able to retrieve a lot of ceramic pieces, several thousands of them, concluding that there are probably 2 early Neolithic settlements. So he did excellent and systematic work. So when we are talking about this season, 2013, I was very happy that both of us found a common interest. So he came and he's been here for over 3 months now. I think he's doing an excellent job. We would very much like to see him next year and the years to come, because I think he will help us a lot to better understand this unique archaeological and civilization situation here in Bosnia. So ladies and gentlemen, Timothy Moore.
Thank you also, Samir, for that salute. I have to compliment you also on your tenacity and your drive in following your thesis forward in the face of such strong opposition. I should also acknowledge the previous archaeologists that have gone before me and all the volunteers. I've come into a project that is extremely well set up. The paths are quite clear, and my responsibilities as I saw them was really to put in place some robust systems that could withstand examination from external sources. As you know, the international community think this is a joke. They believe everything here is a natural formation. They do not believe that there are ancient civilizations here. When I say ancient civilizations, I mean from the time before. Because that really is where we are at here. We are dealing with a time before the Ice Age.
Lights down.
Oh, that's a good idea. Could we drop the house lights, please? No, look, I have to apologise. I'm Mac, this is the world's PC, so I have to stand here and drive this. So I'm sorry if I'm obstructing your view, but maybe if you'd just like to rearrange yourselves now before we start, and then there won't be really much of a problem. So what I'd really like to do is just set a context first about of what we're dealing with here in Bosnia. It's quite important to understand what this part of the world is about. Bosnia, as we see it today, is there something wrong? Okay, sorry. Bosnia, as we see it today, is the result of many cultural occupations and cultural layers. Essentially, in reverse order, we're talking about the Tito, Yugoslavia, Austria, Hungary, going further back into the Ottoman invasions, which happened in several stages. It wasn't just one invasion of this part of the world. Then back to the 15th to 13th century kingdom that was here. That was an extremely important and well-structured kingdom. And then prior to that, we go back to they established, of course, the Sofia and Stalingrad, the house that was on top of Pribysonca, which was occupied for some 200 years. And farther back we go to Roman settlements, Valerian, Botnia, and then things become a little bit vague beyond that. However, what we do know is that while the rest of the world was locked up in an ice age, this part of the world was relatively ice-free. It enjoyed a Mediterranean climate because of the ice wall that was in the northern hemisphere, in the northern parts of the northern hemisphere. It pushed populations south into the Iberian Peninsula, through to Italy, Crete, and down to this part of the world, Bosnia, Macedonia, and of course Greece. So we find that Bosnia is really positioned between some of the great philosophical civilizations of our time, being Greek and Roman. That's quite an important thing, I think, to understand, that it's at a crossroads, that it existed amongst high learning, high civilization. So when I first came to Visoko, I really felt a challenge to understand what was happening here. And I went out into the mountains and looked around in the mountains, and I found a lot of evidence of occupation. So the picture became quite clear to me that this river valley supported large populations. It had all the economics that are required for that. It had access to fresh water, it had fertile growing land, it had mountains that were good occupation spaces that offered defence and security and so forth. So, and also there was an east-west orientation, which is extremely important. And all these attributes are very similar to the Sacred Valley of Cuzco, in that the sun rises and sets across the valley, the valley is dominated by a large river, and evidence of distant populations. I find these things are quite important to keep in mind when considering, are we dealing with pyramids here, what sort of culture could possibly have built them. We can begin to understand that it did support a large population. So I know archaeology can be an extremely dry subject. I've decided that I'd do more sort of a pictorial thing for you and take you through some of our findings. We've had a really exciting year. Every single day we've been discovering new things, not just new things, but things we've never seen before. They're extremely challenging. They challenge us intellectually to understand what it is we're looking at. We engage in conversation with our volunteers. The feeling is that many people have got perspectives and ideas, and we ask people to share those perspectives and ideas. And we've held many think tanks over the last 3 months, and we've developed new lines of inquiry that are helping us advance the project. So the volunteer program isn't just a labour force, it's also a philosophical, intellectual and spiritual resource also. So it's extremely valuable in those regards. I'm going to start with Temple of Mother Earth, which is situated between the Moon Pyramid and the Dragon Pyramid. Temple of Mother Earth, we believe, is an ancient Neolithic settlement. I estimate there's probably 80 to 100 houses there. It was probably occupied for an extremely long period of time. In terms of dating, I believe we're looking around about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. So it's quite significant. And I think in time it will be excavated, will become a showpiece, and will be known throughout Europe as a fine example of Neolithic settlements. So I don't think you have time to visit there, but if you do, you should visit. It's a very tranquil, peaceful place. The Temple of Mother Earth delivered a lot of things for us. The initial excavation on one house site, we recovered 4,800 pieces of ceramic spanning a couple of thousand years. We found a number of Macedonian coins, some Roman coins. We actually dug through a soil lens layer that I believe is a decayed body, probably 2,000 years old. The material was really just a stain on the soil. And then below that, we started to get down to the real occupational layers, and that is where we came across a lot of microliths, which are very small stone tools, very typical of Neolithic man. They form points, which are arrowheads, small cutting tools for flaying flesh off animals, and things of that nature. Then to this year, the collection really started beginning with recovering stones from the Ravna complex. You've seen Ravna tunnels, and in Ravna tunnels a lot of material is being excavated to develop the tunnel system. And in the process of excavation, a lot of artefacts are retrieved. We've set up a protocol to examine each wheelbarrow that comes out of Ravna, and we're looking for culturally modified material. Now I know that a number of you, of course, were at the laboratory today, and so what I'm telling you, I'm reiterating. I'm sorry that there's a lot of people here that weren't there. So as this collection develops, we move into ceramics. We've processed over 15,000 ceramics in the last 8 weeks through the laboratory. I think that's quite an achievement. They span all ages, from ancient through to Roman. We set up lab technicians, people who develop skills in this area. Again, volunteers come here with things to offer. They come with personal life skills. They also accompany with academic skills. This little piece you would have seen also in the laboratory. This was retrieved in June from Ravna tunnels. It's quite perplexing. I'm not sure what it is. It has ergonomics. It's very comfortable to hold in your hand. It has symmetry. If you take a centre line and you have almost a mirror image. So we have two sections here, two sections here. We have symmetry in the shape here and here and here and here. The reverse side of it is quite intriguing. It seems to have suffered a lot of erosion, so I'm not sure whether this was a dual-sided item or not. But we've actually put this out on the internet and invited people in the world to comment on it as to ideas as to what it might be, its purpose, its design, and so forth. I think it's really important that I reiterate at this point something I talked about today in the laboratory. We don't know everything about the things that we've recovered. We've recovered an enormous amount of material. What we do know is that it displays cultural modification, and that's the key ingredient. We're looking for material that has been affected by humans, and therefore we tie humans to these places, and we tie humans to these dates, and therefore we have culture and a cultural layer. However, we're not afraid to say we don't know what something is, because we think it's actually a mistake to try and say what something is. And a good example would be, for the last 200 years we've believed that, we've been told that pyramids are tombs. 200 years later, we're now having to admit that, of course, they're not tombs at all. So the situation would be much better to say, well, we're not quite sure what it is, but let's investigate and let's see what we can find out. That's been my philosophical approach to this project. This project is extremely complex on many, many levels. The artifact levels, the energy levels, the terraforming and so forth. This clay tile was retrieved in July. It has some impressions on it that look like perhaps simple tool marks or scratches that could have happened while it was being mined. However, a volunteer with a keen eye thought he saw more in it and brought it back to the laboratory and marked it up. So I'm going to come back to that shortly, but I just wanted to show you some examples of the kinds of things that we have. One of the first major projects we undertook this year was to determine the extent of concrete on the north face of the pyramid. Up until now, the project has been involved in excavating very large areas. It's extremely challenging and difficult. The soils are up to 2 metres thick, 10 metres deep. It's very intensive. This year we decided to cut a trench. We took a trench from Sonda 11, which I know that you visited the blocks today. This is across to the right and vertical. It runs probably 50 or 60 metres straight up the hill. And it's a very large expanse of concrete. But what we wanted to do was follow the end of that and see where that led us, and is there concrete across the top of the pyramid. Our decision was to create a trench, a horizontal trench, as opposed to clearing large areas. So we commenced digging this trench, which took 2 weeks to take through to its finish. It essentially follows the concrete from one edge to the other, and it comes within 2 metres, so 3 metres of a Sonda trench, a large trench called Sonda 12B, which is a very large hole, about 4 metres in diameter and about 3.5 metres deep, 3.8 metres deep. That leads to a crack in the pyramid, but what it also shows us is the level of the pyramid. And our concerns were that the pyramid appeared to be a lot lower at this point than at the Sondas adjacent to it. So that's why we felt it necessary to dig this trench, so we can understand, does the outside casing of the pyramid suddenly drop and change, or are we dealing with the same thing? What we actually found was that as we dug this trench through, and as you can see we're following the extent of the concrete here, that's the concrete casing to the pyramid. Incidentally, we found a couple of quite large cracks as we went through there, and the cracks were delivering large volumes of air. And the air smelled identical to Ravna tunnels. So when we have a crack and we have airflow, we know that we have a subsurface, subterranean chamber or passageway. However, this concrete is so impenetrable we can't go in through those, but we can see cameras. This is Sonda 12B. This is the concrete that appears to be at a different level to the rest of the pyramid. This is a large crack in the pyramid here. You can climb, we've constructed some steps, so you can climb down, pop in here, and you're actually inside the pyramid at that point. There's another crack that's 40 millimetres wide by 3.5 metres long. It also has air coming out of it, so we know there's another chamber below there. However, there's another layer of 80mm concrete to get through, and that's not possible. We don't wish to break into this pyramid. We do intend in time to find an entry point, but we don't wish to break into it using aggressive technique. We set up a plumb line. We ran a line for 22 metres across the trench and across onto 12B. We dropped vertical plumbs down to the surface. We measured these plumb lines. Actually, I'm sorry, the lighting is so terrible, but there's a plumb line running down here. He's holding the plumb on the surface of the concrete, and using some trigonometry, we're able to then calculate, are these levels of concrete the same or are they different? We found them to be within 20mm, so we call that exactly the same. So that answers a lot of questions for us. What that told us was that across the extent of the north face of the pyramid, we have 130 linear metres of concrete. We have 1,400 square metres of concrete cleared. We're reasonably confident now to say that the lower north face of the pyramid is concrete. That's a really important point, because by exposing the concrete through here, we're able to satisfy the argument that this is not just a natural formation. It's consistent. It's consistent with the millimetres. This trench has now been wrapped for winter to offer it some protection, to try and reduce erosion. We're very concerned about protecting our archaeological sites here. We don't want to be criticised for digging large holes, deserting them, and then those large holes collapsing. So thank you to the team that helped do that. So we decided then to move from the lower slopes of the pyramid and really mix it up and get on top. This photo, again, because of the light in this room, is going to be very difficult for you to see, but if you look there, you can see some grey stuff there. That is smoke. So we lit a very small fire up there and put some green vegetation on it to set up a smoke signal. We then came down into Vesico and took coordinates and bearings off that smoke signal. And our objective was to find exactly this triangle here. There's an all-seeing eye on the top of this pyramid. It hasn't been investigated before. What we found when we arrived there was that the vegetation is completely different from the rest of the vegetation, that the root systems, rather than going deep, suddenly go wide, and that signals to us that they're encountering some obstruction. So investigation finds, we find concrete. And we find concrete at a very shallow level, only 200mm. So where you were today, you saw us digging in up to 2 metres of soil. In these areas we only need to dig 200mm. So we can clear fairly large areas if that's required in a fairly short space of time. We then moved on to the east side. So just to clarify for you, this is the north face. This is the east face down here, south of course being behind. We moved horizontally from that level to do some sampling on the eastern side, and again we found concrete there, large amounts of it at 150mm depth. So not to be too tedious, we're trying to prove here that this pyramid is encased in concrete, and by digging sample trenches we're able to establish that and satisfy ourselves that we only need to do micro excavations rather than major excavations. We reduce the environmental impact and destruction and so forth. We then moved to the West Terrace, which I have to say is really something I'm excited about, and we might be able to revisit it next year. I'll show you again just where the West Terrace is. So again, north, this is west. The plateau runs off the west. We're up quite high, we're up in this region here, we're 49 metres exactly down from Sarajevo in the public land outside the protected areas of the archaeological site on the top of Piramide Sunsa. However, we marked out 2 areas here which we identified as having potential. It's difficult to explain to you exactly why these areas have been chosen, but I believe that there is a small sun temple underneath the soil there at a fairly shallow depth. We started excavating. Within the first 20 minutes, the first artefact came to the surface. There's a very beautiful piece of bronze work. The detail here is it's finely turned on the ends. I have to say it was in exceptionally good condition. It had not been damaged in any way whatsoever. That would date probably, I would think, probably 15th, maybe 14th century. Quite an exquisite piece. Finding something like that in 20 minutes and in such shallow soil, you can see here we're talking maybe 100 millimetres of soil, means that we've hit a large area of cultural occupation and it's likely to deliver an enormous amount of new material. However, that was not to be. The observations were that we had been seeing what we were doing, people were concerned about what we were doing, government officials were concerned about what we were doing, the mayor was concerned about what we were doing, and they asked us to cease. So we're putting together an archaeological plan to investigate this area next year. Personally, I think that their main concerns are that we were right on the money, we're digging in the right place, and they don't want us to be where we are and find what we're going to find. However, time will show that, and we will revisit. So, in some respects, we were being renegade, but we were being respectful. It was a very controlled dig, and we acted responsibly when we were asked to. Now, moving on through from the excavations, we now start coming through to some of the dating processes. We've had some quite marvellous results in terms of dating these structures. You may be aware that last year an organic leaf was found under some clay on one of the cinders on the perimeter of the sun. It was dated to 24,800 years ago. Very, very exciting. That kind of gives us an epoch that we're working to. It sits quite comfortably with what we are thinking. The time before the Ice Age, sophisticated culture that existed before we knew sophisticated cultures existed. Essentially, people were supposed to be archaic people. Quite clearly, they were not. And in the Sonda 12, the crack. This is first shift in June. This is our friend Thomas from Norway. The job was to extract clay layers through here to see how deep we can go looking for a chamber. Immediately under the concrete, this is below the concrete. These leaves were found within a piece of clay. Extremely exciting and important. So they were rushed off for carbon dating to the Ukraine, and we waited about a month for the results to come back. It takes about, carbon dating is a very interesting process. To bore you with the facts, C14 isotope exists in 1 part per trillion. It's very, very minute, very rare. The counting of it takes an extremely long time. I think these get counted for about 3,000 minutes, which is about 40 odd days. It has a known decay rate, so we can calculate, every living organism has carbon-14 isotope. It has a known decay rate, so we can calculate the half-life and what the precision is and approximately how old it is. The date that we got for this was quite extraordinary. We got a date back for this pyramid, and we're the first people to really know about it, and it was 29,200 years, plus or minus 400 years. So we believe that we have a 30,000-year-old structure here. And when I say 30,000 years, carbon dating provides us a minimum date. That means that the material is no younger than that date. However, the structure it's found in association with, of course, can be older. And of course it is older. You have to think about the cultural lead time to develop an arts and science and technologies to build a pyramid, let alone the 30,000-year period that it's been lying dormant. So we're talking about a structure that could be hundreds of thousands of years old. Don't quote me on that. I'm telling you 29,200. We moved on through to obtain some more carbon dating. We've received a lot of carbon this year, and it is creating a little bit of an issue for us. It's a moderately expensive process, particularly when we're looking at a lot of samples. But also because we are working at this edge in archaeology, we're actually pushing the available dating systems to the maximum. We don't think we can work with material much more than 30,000 years old with the carbon dating process. We need to find some laboratories that can assist us to start dating other materials and provide some reliable data perhaps exceeding these dates. 30,000 is getting to the edge of carbon's reliability. The next one was in Ravna tunnels. In Ravna tunnels we've cut a new tunnel, a new access tunnel in June. This is the location where some organic material was found, just down on the corner here. It was a rather interesting substance. We're not quite sure what it is. We have feelings that it could possibly be biological matter. We're looking for some assistance in dating or analysing ancient DNA. But the DNA or the biological material we're working with is so old that ancient DNA to forensic science is probably 4,000 to 5,000 years old. We're well beyond that. So we've got a very interesting date here which helps us now construct a picture for both Ravna and the pyramid and their association. And the date we received for Ravna tunnels is 20,100 years, plus or minus 300. So essentially what we have here is we have the carbon date of the pyramid of 24,800 years, the carbon date of the pyramid of 29,000 years, and a carbon date out of the tunnels of 20,000 years. Regardless of the spread of these, we're talking a distant epoch. We are definitely talking about structures and cultural activity when there really was not supposed to be this sort of activity. This is extremely important to understand. This is the kind of information that Orthodox science has been concerned about, that there were not archaic people in these times. They were extremely advanced people, possibly with technologies more advanced than what we have today. And so it begins. We start discovering more things in this section. This is the 20,000 year section. We found this nose of this little item here sticking out of the conglomerate in this access tunnel. To heavy stress, this is not an existing tunnel. We were creating a new tunnel to join on to another tunnel that we knew was there. So we were cutting through the conglomerate. And cutting through the conglomerate, we've come across this. This is now called the egg. The egg is born, and this is the egg. I don't know if you've seen it. It's 1.1 metres in length. It is 700 millimetres across and 300 millimetres deep, and it's partly hollow. It's constructed or made from ceramic material. It's quite a beautiful thing. It feels very personal to me. It'd be very interesting to discover what its internal functions are. We're looking at considering ways that we can peer inside it without being invasive. We need to be able to listen to it. We need to be able to hear echo from it. And we perhaps need to use some sort of radar to be able to look through it. But we've been very gentle with this. We've built a little protection around it, around the nose of it, so that it can't be damaged. We don't particularly want to move it at the moment. These stones were buried a long time ago. They're very, very precious, and this one in particular. From there, in the same section of tunnel, we come back to the tile I showed you earlier, which one of our volunteers identified. I'm sorry, the light's really terrible in this room. There's some very small little markings on here. You may have seen this in the laboratory today. We go through processes. We mark this up with a pencil first to look at the material. We then photograph it. We then gently remove the pencil. We then take a coloured pencil, a red pencil, and we start marking everything with a tight discipline. And we work across the stone in a symmetrical cycle, vertically and horizontally. One of our lab technicians is looking for linguistic patterns, looking for structure and form. These are the markings that were evident on this stone. They're very, very interesting. You can see that there is definite structure to them. We then do, this is part of an encryption process of looking for frequency of count. So we look at the number of symbols, how many times do these symbols appear. The line appears 15 times. So that is not something that we may fully regard, because a vertical line could quite easily be an accidental tool mark or something of that nature. However, we start looking at some of the others. This V appears in many directions. It appears 5 times, this symbol, which is similar to a C, 3 times. These double T's, twice for this. And then we try to find out what language this might be. The only references we really have are European ruins. We've carried out an analysis on those, but I didn't want to present those tonight because I'm still not convinced that they're reliable. We were getting words, a series of words. The words are God, joy, ice, water, and something that kind of looked like it was talking about human health. However, to do that, we're using elder ruins, which is the oldest form we have in the Northern Hemisphere. We think this might be a predescendant to it, and that Elder is actually an antecedent to this language, if this is a language. This stone will go and undergo much more examination, and we might possibly consider loaning this out to a museum somewhere around the world to undertake linguistic studies on it and decode it for us, which we think would be really good. I guess I should emphasise that point. One of the things that I've been striving for here is to build a collection of material that we can tour, that there is material here for the Foundations Museum, laboratory, etc. But there's also material that we can loan to other interested museums around the world from time to time, that we can also loan to universities to investigate and study. And by doing that, we will achieve a lot, because we are limited in our own resources. This is a huge project. I'm one archaeologist, and we're 345 volunteers. One of our lovely volunteers. Examining a stone foot. This stone foot was found in the filler material in Ravna tunnels. This has come from the area that is the 20,000 year minimum mark. This is what the foot looks like. We've undertaken comparisons between this and a human foot. We're finding 8 different anatomically correct aspects to this foot. We don't believe it is a foot to a statue. We believe it is a blank of some sort, perhaps to make a shoe. Perhaps it has some other function. It might have been used to maybe study reflexology, acupuncture. We just do not know. It will reveal more though in time. Now, in the last 4 days, we've found 5 more of these feet, which is very interesting. So this was the first. We've now, this is size 37 by the way. We have then found what appears to be a child's foot. It has less detail on the sole. Children's feet develop quite differently to adults' feet. Then we have found an infant's foot, and then we have found 2 more blanks that go with that. So we have a collection of 5 at the moment. We think that's quite extraordinary. These come from at least 20,000 years old. From the same deposit, we're finding more language. We have this stone here that one of our volunteers, Mia, has been working with. Around the bottom of the stone, we observed a lot of markings, which we then marked up. We marked up in red. You would have seen this in the laboratory today. We're not sure whether we should be looking at this horizontally, vertically, what angle, whether this gets, which way this gets read. However, again, it's showing symmetry, it's showing patterns. We believe it is a language, and it's certainly worth investigating further. I'm really hoping that I can find somebody who is majoring in linguistics who would like to come and volunteer and work with some of this material with us. Even a 2 to 3 week session in the laboratory could reveal a lot for us. And please understand that if we do crack this material, we are going to start to discover knowledge, and knowledge is what this list is all about. Now this stone is a real darling. This has been nicknamed the Heart Stone. It has an elusive image. When the stone came out of Ravna tunnels, what was evident was this spiral here, which then extends up to this area of the stone here. There's 3 or 4 small dots here, and there's another dot over here. What happened over 48 hours, it started to fade. We would gently wet it again and photograph it again. The image would be there as the stone dried. The image would then disappear again. It appeared to be losing its energy and losing its image. We have 35 photographs of this image at various stages, and that gives us some material to investigate. We're actually going to try something with the stone, which you might think a little bit odd. But when I finish this year, we're going to bury the stone again where we found it, and we're going to leave it there for a year. And then after a year, we're going to re-examine the stone and see whether it's been re-energized, whether the image comes back. It could be something as simple as the pH balance of the water, where it has come from. It could be something to do with the soils that it's buried in. We'd like to explore that and see whether we can understand and whether we can retrieve it. Either way, it's been preserved in photography. We have the artifact, we just don't have the image. Now, we're finding a lot of material in Ravna that I would describe as, well actually they're quite difficult to describe. They're stones. They're indescript stones. They sit very comfortably in your hand. They're about 100 millimeters long. Most of them are left-handed. We're discovering that they have art images on them or images on them. Again, this is very difficult to see in this light. People saw this in the laboratory today. There's a small face here, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the chin. Then it has this hair here, which we nicknamed Bob Marley, of course, but as I said today, we are now seeing that this is, it looks like a representation of Medusa, which we think is an extremely interesting thing to find, particularly in an ancient culture that existed a long time before the Greeks. We found another stone in the last day that also has an image on it, and that has helped us understand that the other blanks we have are probably not blank, we just cannot see them. We're going to preserve that material and archive it. The idea is that perhaps we can laser scan it at some point, and with laser we might be able to reveal the images that are on these stones. Here's our tetras. These were also found in the 20,000 year deposit. So essentially what happened is when we were breaking through this, creating this access tunnel, finding organic material, marking a 20,000 year old point, that is when we started discovering a lot of culturally modified material. And that's confused the picture because this material was buried under thousands of tons of conglomerate and has been there for a very, very, very long time. Material like this is culturally modified, very clearly cut. This one's ceramic, this one's stone, a completely different material. We have put them together, but they perhaps did not belong together. In the same area, we've now found 5 pieces like this, so we know we have a technology and a pattern. You can see that we're building up a picture here of cultural occupation and cultural layers. That's extremely important to us because the major criticism we have is that everything that we're dealing with is natural. It's natural formation, it's not man-made, it's a product of nature. My goal has been to develop an archive of material that can be examined by external archaeologists, geologists, whomever, and demonstrate to them that we definitely have the presence of culture and the presence of man. From there, we then started another investigation around the tunnels. In the tunnels, we've seen the dry walls. These dry walls mark the beginning or end of side tunnels. This is a very typical dry wall. They're quite a beautiful little thing when you get to know them. They do not cover the entire tunnel entrance. They all leave a void at the top here where you can see the filler material. They're comprised of courses of stone, carefully placed, with no binding material between them. Now, our assessment, based on some very early carbon dating, is that these dry walls are a minimum of 4,600 years old. So they're a very old technology. If we're to accept orthodox archaeology's explanation to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, putting them at 5,000 years ago, that means that our dry walls are as old as the Great Pyramids of Egypt, which is extremely interesting, and they need to be treated with that sort of respect. We have 41 of them in our public sections. In the closed sections and the scientific sections of the tunnels, there's more and more and more. So it's a very interesting technology. We do not fully understand it, but we're wanting to explore it. One of the first things we've decided to do is write a protocol for dealing with dry walls. If for any reason we're required to disassemble a dry wall, we must preserve all the data and information we can. So our protocol requires that when we disassemble a dry wall, its statistics must be recorded. We record its dimensions, we number and count every single stone, we sketch all the stones. We then set about the disassembly process and we carefully remove each stone. We treat them as artefacts, which we believe they are. They are an archaeological feature, and they're an extremely old archaeological feature. So it was necessary to remove this dry wall, and in the process we gathered a lot of information about it, about how they're constructed. We certainly do not have the skills to reconstruct one. This is very much like Inca stonework, where the person that built these walls wasn't just simply, hadn't just learned to do this. They would have been, their father would have done this, their grandfather would have done this. These are craftsmen at work, and it's that craftsmanship that we, as modern people, just simply cannot replicate. We then transported all the material away to the laboratory. We photographed each stone in the laboratory. You might think this is going a little bit far, but we really take archaeology seriously here, and we were documenting this dry wall as a 4,500-year-old archaeological feature and giving it the respect it required there. I'm not a fan for reconstruction. All over the world I see archaeological reconstructions and I find them quite embarrassing and wonder what on earth the archaeologists are thinking. And so I felt a little bit apprehensive about trying to reassemble the drywall, however we gave it a shot. What we discovered in the process, of course, is that these drywalls have an anchor stone. The anchor stone is very important in the drywall. It essentially sets the mood for the rest of the wall and hangs everything off the wall. It is, again, very, very similar to the way the Inca worked, where the Inca would use one stone and that all the other stones would grow to join. And by that, they meant that there'd been energy transfer, either through gravity or whatever, and it was the stabilising thing for the entire wall. And then you can understand why we spent so much time taking detailed photographs, sketches and so forth, so that in the reassembly process we had material to refer to. This drywall has been reassembled and is at the entrance to the Ravana Tunnel complex. We're building a small gabled roof over it. We're bringing some more film material to put in around it. We want to create an environment that's humid, protected from the sun, and we'll investigate it. If for any reason this drywall starts to deteriorate because it's outside, not inside the tunnels, it's on public display and maybe that's not what it should be, then we will disassemble it and we will store all of these stones and keep them for future reference. Each stone is numbered. So in the process of doing this, we have gone through the Ravana Tunnel complex. We've measured every single drywall in Ravana tunnels. We've measured the distance they are from the entrance, their declination, inclination, height, the number of courses, number of stones, and we find they vary from being 60 centimetres wide to 5.69 metres wide. They vary from being 40 stones to being 150 stones. A lot of really important information. In the process, we were able to develop a new map of the Ravana Tunnel complex. So this is the most up-to-date map showing drywalls and their locations, with keys showing the distances, etc. This is important scientific information and the kind of material that we should responsibly be doing, so we're very pleased about this, and I'll acknowledge Richard Boyle, who led the survey for me, and Tim Denmark, who were his anthropologists. Right, this is the open section of 153 metre tunnel here. And I'll just bore you for a moment and just play a little video so you can understand what the unaffected original parts of the tunnel system are like. Okay, so that's what the Ravana Tunnel system is like in the open sections. You can see that the tunnels are approximately 80 centimetres in diameter. You crawl on hands and knees. That particular section goes for 153 metres. Credits to my photographer here, the videographer, Nigel Grace.
Yeah.
We found when we got to the end of that 153 metre section that our heart rate started to increase, our temperature started to increase, we realised oxygen was decreasing, so we couldn't go any further. We got maybe within 12 metres at the very end, which was very interesting because another perplexing issue in this system, which I'll talk about shortly, is how is oxygen being generated in the Ruffner tunnel system. The footage there is a little confusing for you at first look, but we're talking about essentially a rabbit hole that goes for a vast distance with other side tunnels running off it, which then again run into more. So it's an absolute labyrinth of underground networks that when you examine the material, you really have to consider, are these for human egress? And they really do not appear to be. They're extremely difficult to navigate, they're uncomfortable to be in. If there is a collapse in there, of course, there's no chance of recovering them. So that's the new section. Then, of course, we had another breakthrough this year, and that was the discovery of the megalith. And this is the megalith. We're not quite sure of its dimensions yet. It runs through here to the back and down through here. It disappears under the wall here, and it appears to come out about 2 or 3 metres on the other side. It disappears through the wall here. We're finding some very interesting features with it. So firstly, at the back is an open section of tunnel. There's 2 tunnels here that are filled in. There's 1 tunnel here that's empty for 800 metres. That provided us a very good opportunity to gain some scientific information. The surface of the megalith is very, very delicate. You're only allowed to step on it in soft-soled shoes or bare feet. We want to protect the surface. On the surface, a great many markings. Symbols, markings, very organic in nature. There's a series of dots and dashes that run down it. There's a spiral over here that then leads under the stones here. Now we've left a lot of that intact at the moment, covered in stones, because archaeology is about patience. We don't want to rush in and damage any of the information that this megalith can deliver. We've left material covering parts of it where we know that there's some interesting signs, and when we're ready we'll remove that material and look at the signs. But at the moment we're working in there, and the chances of us damaging those vital signs is too high. Cleaning with a very soft brush to reveal what is on the surface of it. Examining some of the markings, there's an interesting circle that's inlaid into it, and it contrasts with the other markings that are on the stone. We're not quite sure what it is, and neither are we actually exactly sure what the stone is made out of. The problem or the challenge with this at the moment is to understand its dimensions, understand its depth and how deep into the soil it is, and then what its relationship is to the other megaliths in the area. What we are finding though is we're finding foundations to buildings. These are very large cut stones with tall marks on them. This one's particularly large and disappears into the wall. And we have uncovered more of it. We estimate the stone is about 3 tonnes at the moment. Another square cut block behind it, and some more over here. We think we might have the top of a side tunnel here, which means there could be yet another subterranean level to the system. The water table is very shallow. The water table is approximately 150 millimetres, so we know that whatever's below us is flooded. It probably is intended to be that way. We have cut some horizontal trenches. The chamber's too large to expand, so we've cut 3 trenches here, here and here. They're arch in shape, which gives a self-supporting structure. They go in about 1 metre, and then we gently move down to the surface looking for foundation stones and artefacts. We've recovered some ceramics. We've recovered 14 pieces of organic material from this entire area. On this side here we have some very beautiful foundation stones. A photograph has been shot today of those, but unfortunately I don't have that to show you at the moment. We found the sunstone sitting near the entrance to it. It does require to be examined further. It sits on this edge here, so it sits vertically. It's a 42 millimetre diameter circle, and then it appears to have what appears to be flames etched or painted around it. The material in the middle is bleached compared to the material on the outside. We think it's the same material. I don't believe this to be an inlay. If it is an inlay, it's an absolutely expert inlay. But however, that's going to undergo more investigation. This is the kind of material that's being recovered off the megalith, which will help us piece together a picture of the culture that is there. These are some of the organic samples we have. We won't send this material off just yet. We're looking for some other results first, and then we will select the particular organic material to be sampled, and we'll select the laboratories, and we'll build up a picture of how old this megalith is. We spent a lot of time photographing it. We string lines as reference points. We've taken 100 photographs, macro photographs of the surface of this. They're being stitched together at the moment to give us a composite picture of it, and also to preserve that data in case anything gets damaged in our exploration and investigation. Some of the surface markings in more detail. They're very organic in form. And these people are examining and recording some of that detail. And just some reference shots. A small video we shot when the megalith was immediately found, and I'll just play this for you. So these are the kinds of things we've been discovering. We think it's a new kind of insect, and we need to work with some entomologists to see if we can identify what it is. But they continue to come off it for 4 days, thousands and thousands of them, and they can still be photographed today. A negative ion survey that we did here, and I'd like to credit Thomas Machner and friend Jaco Winkle, who undertook these surveys for us. We were wanting to understand how the cave system behaved, how the tunnel system behaved, how it breathed, how it recovered, etc. And we gained some quite valuable information. Now, all of this is indicative only. We can undertake scientific examination, but ultimately, if we want extremely reliable scientific information, we must invite an expert scientist in that field to come and survey and sign it off. But essentially, you can see here that we took readings at the entrance at various depths in the healing chamber and the K2 chamber. We took them approximately every 2 hours, and we ran this for 4 or 5 days. We've repeated this several times, and the information is fairly consistent. We have that data available. But Thomas has put this together for us, so we have some anomalies here. Now, it hasn't been unusual to hit these really large numbers, but the reason Thomas has highlighted them is we've kind of thought that we should leave those out of the weighting of data. But you can see that we're talking in the 30,000s, 20, 25,000, mid-20s, 30s, and so forth. So it's very consistent. And what we're finding is that when large tour groups go through Ravna tunnels, they bring a lot with them. They bring their body temperature, the moisture of their breath, a lot of static electricity on their clothes, a lot of positive ion with them. The tunnel system then does take a bit of a dive, but what is incredibly interesting is that it always bounces back and recovers again. So some of the questions we have are this: how is the negative ion being generated? And also, how is the oxygen being liberated from the water? And these are two very, very interesting questions. They might sound extremely boring to you, but what we know is we have a very complex system down here, and this complex system is producing oxygen and is producing negative ion. One of the lines of we've got several lines of inquiry, and it's how is this negative ion being generated? How does the system self-regulate? Because it is regulating itself, so somehow it knows when to turn off and back off, and knows when to kick in and come up. How is the oxygen being liberated? And some questions we've been asking recently is the filler material in the side tunnels just filler material? Could that be contributing to this? We look at the amount of effort and economics involved to fill these side tunnels in. the amount of material, it's absolutely thousands of tons of material is gone in. And the question I keep having is it must serve a benefit. And is that benefit to suppress something, or is that benefit actually to create something? So what we'd like to do is we'd like to undertake some investigation of measuring the negative ions somehow coming actually out of those walls, the level of oxygen that's present in those wall systems, those tunnel systems, and see whether this is part of the conversion of O2 from H2O and negative ion to the from the oxygen molecule. Interesting stuff. Of course, the solstice, very important day. Just a very quick little slide presentation of the celebrations that occurred on the summer solstice. Here we have a pyramidal structure. Its orientation is extremely important. On the west face we have the Western Plateau, which must have been the ceremonial plateau, very significant. Here we are looking west on the longest day of the year, a very auspicious day. So I took this telemetry and I have been begging a friend to get me a helicopter and take me there, because I'm sure we're going to find a sun gate, or we're going to find lithic structures on those coordinates on that mountain range in the distance. The sun has set in that exact point for thousands of years. This structure, we know it goes back thousands of years. I believe that there was something there, and that is going to be written into another helicopter next year, please. To take you through to just some examples, this is Teotihuacan in Mexico. This was painted in, I think, about 1858, 1860-ish, somewhere around there. Note all of this vegetation through here, this hill here, and then of course what it looks like today. This is the cleared vegetation through here, and this is the hill. This is what we're dealing with here in Vizicol. It's no different. So in some respects, a little bit of self-doubt occasionally creeps in, but then we look at structures like this and think there's clear evidence of these monuments being born from vegetation, and that's where we feel. So I'd just like to do a quick summary here, is that we've discovered an awful lot this year, and in fact we're making discoveries every single day, and I'm not exaggerating there. The discoveries we're making, some we understand and some we do not, some we can talk about and some we cannot. However, we have an open source policy, and in time when we've analysed this information, it will be released to the public. It will be available on our blog site and through the Foundation's website. So if you feel that I haven't really shown you much in the way of discovery, it's been an enormous amount of discovery, and the data that we're going to mine out of this over the next 6 months will really prove that. So when we find an artefact, we're not immediately able to extract all the information from it. It does take time. But we do have the artefacts, we do have the features, and we do have the phenomena that we have here. And lastly, I have to do this, the people that made it possible. Therese Marie, my wife, Oscar Henri, and Phoebe Sophia. So thank you very much.